which could be viral, bacterial, fungal, parasitamic, or it could be non-infectious as a part of autoimmune or as a part of neoplastic reaction. It may be associated with certain metabolic diseases. I'll detail on that. It may result from a trauma. This trauma may be a direct trauma, or it may be an indirect trauma whenever the patient is exposed to radiations. There could be radiational pericarditis. At times, the trauma it takes time for the pericarditis to develop following a trauma. This is known as delayed traumatic response, and classical is what we talked in post myocardial infarction, known as Dressler syndrome, or it could be post cardiac. Say somebody having MI or cardiac procedure in the past develops inflammation in pericarditis later on. It could be because of certain drugs. So let us elaborate on that. Amongst the infection, three infections always to be remembered in our settings is the viral. Coxsackie is the most common. It could be bacterial or it could be tubercular. Rest of the infections, whether it is fungal, rickettsial, mycoplasma, leptospira, listeria, parasitic, they are very uncommon. So in case we are evaluating before terming something as idiopathic, three infections should always be. One is Coxsackie virus, bacterial, and in India, tubercular pericarditis should always be looked into. Pericardium is an outer layer. So anything which happens in the heart, like myocardial infarction, it tends to react. Now this could be a direct reason, or it could be the indirect one, as I talked about the Dresslers. Structures adjacent to it, say aortic disease of rheumatoid rheumatic fever SLE, do look for evidences of pericardial involvement. I talked about metabolic, renal system. It could be associated with uremia, or it could be associated with post-dialysis, commonly associated with hypothyroid state, especially myxedema. So metabolic disorders, whether it is because of bad kidneys or because of hypothyroid, one should always rule out. Pericarditis has been found to be associated with neoplastic disorders. This could be primary, say mesothelioma. Well, we all know the lung is involved, the pleura is involved, and with the pleura, the pericardium reacts. As we were talking in the previous slides, that whenever there is a disease of the adjacent structures, it may also be involved. So pericardium may be primarily involved because of mesothelioma, sarcoma, fibroma, lipoma. These all, when they are infiltrating, evokes a pericardial reaction, that is pericarditis. At times, it could be a spillover, which could be metastatic or a direct spread, say adjacent structure. Say classic example is lung carcinoma, or it could be a lymphoma of the mediastinum, lymph nodes, carcinoids. So these structures, these malignancies secondarily involved, and primarily the fibrous sheath can be involved because of the mesothelioma, sarcoma, fibroma. So we have, besides the infective group, besides the connective tissue disorder group, we have this metabolic disorder to be remembered as both uremia as well as post-dialysis, that the patient settled but still can have pericardial disease. Trauma is a very common reason to have pericarditis. A direct chest trauma, steering wheel traumas are very common. While you're driving your automobile, you might just have a steering wheel injury. Or at times it may be a penetrative injury that may evoke the pericardium, because pericardium is the outermost layer of the heart. Same as surgical procedures. Any heart surgeries, pericardium is likely to be inflamed because it is the outermost, and radiation for the lung disorders, mediastinum, tends to pick up and cause pericardial reaction. So pericarditis. The less commonly described are the post-myocardial or pericardial injury syndrome, as I said, Dressler syndrome, which is known as. It may be associated with the other disorders, which could be inflammatory bowel, Loeffler's, Stevens-Johnson's, a very high level of eosinophilic, that is known as hypereosinophilic syndrome, and at times acute pancreatitis can be. But this list, which is on the slides, or to be remembered is a trauma, direct or indirect, or a recent MI or a cardiac procedure. Rest are uncommon causes, and the more common causes are the uremias, the connective tissue disorders, any disease of the adjacent structures, and not to forget viral, bacterial, and tubercular. These are the list of diseases which one needs to elaborate, and most often time, the most common cause is idiopathic. So pericarditis one should look for these causes as possible etiology because they are treatable, they have a direct treatment assessment rather than treating something which is idiopathic. So number one cause of pericarditis, idiopathic. How does pericarditis present? It's an inflammation, so fever, malaise, joint pains, and of course loss of appetite, as is a part of any constitutional reaction to any infection, inflammation. And with it is associated some amount of dyspnea and chest pain. It is the chest pain which is more than the dyspnea. So you have a background of a constitutional symptom presenting in a with chest pain. And what is this chest pain? Chest pain is sharp retrosternal. So is it a myocardial infarction pain? No. Pericardial pains get worse on deep inspiration. Why? Because now the layers are much closer. So the patient gets worse when the patient takes a deep breath, inspiration. When he holds the breath, the pericardial pain becomes much worse. When the patient lies supine, because if the spine, the heart is of the maximum dimension, vis-a-vis when the patient sits or stands, when the heart dimensions or the volumes are less, and volume is less, would definitely will be less on the inflamed pericardium. So lying supine gets the maximum stress on the inflamed pericardium. So the chest pain, which is retrosternal, gets bad with inspiration and get bad with supine, is maybe indicative of pericarditis. And add to it, if the patient sits forward, now the sitting forward, the patient gets relieved. And also, why it's so? Because now the heart volumes would get lesser, right? And as it coming forward, the irritation that it may be causing onto the nerves in the back while supine, as is the example of the phrenic nerve, that at times because of the irritation of the phrenic nerve, there is always a referred pain to scapular ridge. To make the thing simpler, pericarditis has a sharp retrosternal chest pain. This pain is different from myocardial because it has a relation with the respiration, that with deep inspiration, it gets worse. It has a relation with posture, that by lying down, it gets worse, unlike the myocardial inflammation, gets better on sitting forward. And at times, it may be referred back, which will again mimic a myocardial pain. So chest pain in a background of constitutional symptoms may make you think that it could be pericarditis. Chest pain, which is related to the the phases of respiration, that is inspiration, and to the posture, that is supine. What do you find in the signs? The pericardium on inspection of the cardiovascular system is essentially normal. At times, when you palpate pericardial rub, like you can palpate a pleural rub, pericardial rub can be palpated when you put your hands on the left parasternal area or apex. So, pericardial rub may be evident in patients, not always, but at times. So, what is more common? More common is when you auscultate. One tends to auscultate a very scratchy sound, which is high pitched, which is present both in systole and diastole. It is best audible in third, fourth, fifth space, and the location may change with the position of the patient. It is best heard when the patient sits forward and leans forward. That is, on sitting and leaning forward, the contact becomes better, as vis-a-vis when the patient lies supine. The pain was getting better, auscultation was getting better. So pericarditis is a disease which is posture dependent, that is, the pain has relation to posture, and the auscultatory finding of a scratchy, high pitched, heard in both phases, because the pericardium has to move in both phases, systole or diastole. It is a layer, visceral and the parietal, which moves with the movements of the myocardium, and the myocardium moves. So whenever there is a movement, there is a rubbing of the two inflamed surfaces, which causes this scratchy sound. And the best place, as I said, third, fourth space, and best when the patient sits forward. So hallmark is not a palpable of a rub, but an auscultatory pericardial rub. A similar rubby sound or a scratchy sound, which is so superficial, is so commonly talked, which is known as pleural rub. How do we differentiate the two? Both are scratchy sounds, both can be heard on the left side of the chest. So is it pericardial or pleural? The easiest way is ask the patient to hold breath. The moment the patient will hold breath, the pleural rub sound, which was to be because of the rubbing of the parietal and the visceral pleurals when the lung was expanding, goes off. Whereas the pericardium will never be affected because you cannot ask the heart to stop. So, best way whenever doubt of a scratchy sound which is best heard on the left pericardial region, ask the patient to hold breath, and if the sound disappears, it is pleural rub, and if the sound still persists, it is pericardial rub. Very important differentiation because the conditions of pleura can affect the conditions of pericardium, and conditions of pericardium can affect the lung as such. After looking into the symptom of chest pain and the glassy, scratchy sound of pericardial rub, do you have something to look forward in investigations? Well, investigations are helpful if there is an evidence of systemic inflammation. So as a part of the systemic, like we have constitutional symptoms, we have leukocytosis, we have an elevated acute surface reactant, ESR, CRP. At times, because the chest pain so closely mimics the myocardium, and when you ask troponin, CPK-MB, they are found to be elevated. Well, they may be elevated because of pericarditis, but at times, pericardium is not a compartment disease. Pericardium may involve the involvement of the myocardium as well. So any disease which causes myocardium and pericardium simultaneously, a classic example is rheumatic fever. This both, if they are involved, you may have evidences of troponin and CPK rising. So in the workup of pericarditis, if troponin and CPK-MB is elevated, do rule out an associated myocardium disease, although pericarditis is hallmarked by chest pain and the pericardial rub. ECG is very helpful, especially in the early course. One finds a diffuse ST elevation. Now we know ST elevation could be because of myocardial infarction, or it could be because of Prinzmetal angina. But what is differentiating is that there is a PR segment depression, and over the time there would be diffuse T wave inversion. I'll detail about it now. So classically, whenever there is pericarditis, 4 progressive stages of electrocardiography can be seen. To begin with, there is a diffuse ST segment elevation, which is associated with PR segment depression. It is this PR segment depression which differentiates it from the myocardial injury, that is myocardial infarction or Prinzmetal angina. So watch on the PR segment depression. Now, as the inflammation subsides, the ST returns back and the PR segment returns back to baseline. Later on, there is T wave inversion, and in case there is T wave inversion, do keep a watch for myocardial disease, because T wave inversion, you all know that after initial ST elevation, then there is settling of the ST segment and T wave inversion, also seen in coronary artery disease. Now lastly, once the T wave inversion has taken place, after some time the T waves normalizes, a feature which is not in MI. So what started as a mimicker of an MI, because of its changes in the PR segment, because of the changes of normalization of the T wave, it is not so. Now I'll show you in the figures. If you see the first figure, you can find where the arrow points, there is a ST segment elevation with a concavity upwards. Now such a ECG which is given was talked about in the Prinzmetal class. Now as the time settles down, what is more to be seen is that, sorry, I'll just use the cursor, please. Give me a minute. Arranging the cursor. So what we find here is, watch this PR segment. The segment is depressed. Normally it should have been in the same phase of the segment here, but the PR is depressed. There's concavity which is upwards, and over the time, the R wave assumes its normal size. The PR segment is normal. There are no T wave changes, or minimum T wave changes one can find as these are the biphasic T waves. But after the recovery, it is a normal segment QRS, and there is a normal T wave segment. Otherwise, had it been an MI, the TB associated pulmonary or mediastinal pathology, because adjacent structures could be involved. Echocardiogram may be helpful in showing that this pericarditis has some amount of effusiveness, which can be present whenever two layers are inflamed. Otherwise, echo doesn't suggest of an echo, unlike the ECG, which it was suggesting. So, if we were to diagnose an acute pericarditis, we have three things in mind: classical chest pain, which changes with posture, which changes with phases of respiration; a classical rub, which persists when the patient holds the breath; and a classical ECG changes, where after the ST segment elevation, the R waves resumes its normal height and the T wave, before these layers would move. And it is always advisable that any inflamed structure should be put to rest so that the healing is fast. So rest and avoidance of physical activity definitely helps. It's an inflammation. So anti-inflammatory drugs like NSAIDs or aspirin could be good. We have talked about it in the lecture on rheumatic fever. If there is a partial response, as we talked in rheumatic fever, low-dose corticosteroids may be considered. So rest, avoidance of physical activity, and NSAIDs. Still the patient has chest pain and symptoms persist, go for low-dose corticosteroids, and thereafter try to evaluate a specific etiology, especially connective tissue disorders, malignancies, traumas, recent MI, surgeries. They should be first evaluated. Then infections should be looked into. And of course, if the specific etiology is not known, then most probably we are dealing with an idiopathic, which is the most common cause of pericarditis. The prognosis would depend that those which are idiopathic have an excellent prognosis. Uremics are generally recurrent because the kidney condition would be there. They have a high mortality. And rheumatic fever, we all know, is self-resolving over the time with the treatment that we gave. So dear, that was pericarditis. Now the inflammation has gone and it is now producing fluid in the pericardial space, which is normally 25 to 50. This is condition known as pericardial effusion. So pericardial effusion occurs when the fluid accumulates in the intrapericardial space. This fluid accumulation is beyond the 50 ml. Generally, we expect 25 to 50 ml, and the quantity may increase anything from 200 ml to over a liter. So fluid collection beyond 50 ml between the two layers of pericardium, which is because of secondary to the inflammation process, is termed the fluid in the intrapericardial space is known as pericardial effusion. If pericarditis had the most common cause is idiopathic etiology is less common in patient with isolated pericardial. Means it's a paradox. A pericarditis should have resulted in some amount of effusion, but when we talk of pericardial effusion, idiopathic is not the common cause. That means generally idiopathic pericarditis produces less effusion despite being most common cause of pericardial irritation, that is pericarditis. If you have to classify pericardial effusion, this could depend upon the onset: acute occurring within days, subacute occurring over weeks, and chronic occurring over months. It can be classified depending upon the amount. If this between the two layers, visceral and the parietal layer, the distance is less than 10 millimeters, as one can be making it on the echo, this is known as mild. If the distance between the two is 10 to 20 millimeters, not centimeters, it is moderate. And if it is beyond, it is known as large, which is 20 millimeters. So size of the effusion as evident on an echo classifies the pericardial as mild, moderate, large. It could be loculated. A particular segment it is around, or it may be circumferential, which is more common. And as is for the other body fluids, when we aspirate it, is it transudate or exudate? Because transudate would have different reasons and exudates would have different reasons. So pericardial can be classified depending upon its onset, size, distribution, or composition. Chest pain was the highlighting feature of pericarditis. But here, it is the dyspnea. Because if you remember, I said constitutional symptom, dyspnea and chest pain. I didn't talk about dyspnea at all with pericarditis. Because dyspnea is the hallmark of pericardial effusion. Chest pain is the hallmark of pericarditis when we are dealing about diseases of pericardium. Now, why does dyspnea occur? It is due to the encroachment of the intrathoracic space. Well, it is understandable. If fluid is getting collected, we have a limited intrathoracic space. So anything which will increase in size, pericardium will increase in size, the fluid will increase in size. What will it do? It will encroach a fixed intrathoracic space. And in the intrathoracic space, what we have? The lungs and the bronchi. So they start getting compressed. Now, because of this, the lungs and the bronchi getting compressed, understandably, the dyspnea comes up. So dyspnea is because of the compression on the lung, or more particular on the bronchi, which compromises the ventilatory capacity and so results into dyspnea. Now, if these patients leans forward, the fluid tends to gravitate in the forward direction and it comes more downward. Say, if the patient is falling into a forward direction, what will happen? It's a freely movable space. So the all fluid will come in the front. When it comes into the front, the pressure that it was causing on the bronchi or the lung gets lesser. So hence, dyspnea gets relieved on leaning forward, not sitting, but leaning forward, as was your chest pain. In large effusions, there could be dry hacking cough, hoarseness of voice, difficulty in swallowing. Why? They are pressing the bronchi or the esophagus. So the hoarseness, the hacking cough, or the difficulty in swallowing is a result of the encroachment on the bronchus and the esophagus in the intrathoracic space, because the pericardium fluid is gradually expanding, and its effects can only be nulled if the patient leans forward. So we have an idea that there is a dyspnea with a difference, that leaning forward, it gets better. So how do we look for it? On general physical examination, there might be a hint of cyanosis because of the encroachment and the impinging on the bronchi and the lung. There might be a tinge of cyanosis, not the gross cyanosis, but that too only in large effusion. If you examine the heart, the apex beat appears weak. It will appear weak because the apex beat is the outermost and downwardmost palpable part of the heart. Now what has happened is there is a layer of pericardium which generally is almost adjacent to the myocardium. Now the layer is filled with the fluid. So obviously the apex beat is now cushioned between your finger and the impact by a fluid, and so would appear weak. If it is longer, there would be changes in the precordium, and so it starts bulging. Whereas in pericarditis, it was normal pericardium. Generally, when you cardiovascular examination, you do cardiovascular, the percussion corresponds to the area of cardiac dullness on percussion corresponds to the apex beat. That is because apex beat is the outward and downward most portion of the contracting heart. Now, because here there is a layer outside the apex, so there is an increase in the area of cardiac dullness, and the cardiac dullness will not correspond to the apex beat, because apex beat will remain much inner, and there is an outer layer now which is pericardial fluid. Not only that, this pericardial fluid can press on the left bronchus. As I said, they tend to encroach in a three-dimensional aspect. In the three-dimensional, one aspect was the Xiphis sternum and the precordium became bulging. Now in the backward direction, what is it is causing? It is pressing the left bronchus. Because it presses the left bronchus, it causes collapse of the lower lung. So if we do the percussion, there will be an area of dullness in the back because of the collapsed lung. So two areas, area of cardiac dullness has increased in area. It does not correspond with the apex beat. And there is another area which is collapse of the lower lung. This sign is known as Evart sign. Evart sign is due to the collapse caused because of the pressure on the left bronchus. When we auscultate, the heart sound, definitely there is a fluid in between. So they would appear muffled. It is obvious because the auscultation depends upon the distance and the media. Now the media here in between is the fluid, so the heart sound appear muffled. Well, at times that scratchy sound of pericarditis may be heard, which is pericardial rub. But generally it should not be, because once the two layers are not touching each other, the rub would not appear, because they are not touching because of the fluid present. But when in the phase of healing, they again start touching each other, the rub appears. or in the initial phase when it is trying to produce more fluid, the surface may still be. So pericardial rub, it may be an evidence of the early disease, or it may be an evidence of the late healing disease, but the more common is the muffled heart sound. So the salient feature of this is a silent precordium. Because silent, because the apex beat is not discernible because of the overlying fluid. Because the heart cannot work to its function, there is tachycardia. If there is a big one, it compresses on the left bronchus, causing Evart sign, that is dullness because of the collapse of the lung, and the hearts appear muffled. Muffled because now they are distant with the fluid in between, because otherwise, because this layer of pericardium is all around the myocardium. So the features of pericardial disease is silent pericardium, precordium, tachycardia, Evarts, and muffled heart sound. In the same, as the pericardial progresses, the effusion progresses, it causes, the large pericardial effusion causes what is known as cardiac tamponade. How is cardiac tamponade is different? Cardiac tamponade is a medical emergency. It's a diagnosis. Its early diagnosis is a major clinical importance because it can be lethal. So the cardiac tamponade is an impaired diastolic filling of the ventricles due to the raised intrapericardial pressure. Why this raised intrapericardial pressure? Because there is more fluid now. So if there is more fluid, as it is going in the anterior direction where it is trying to compress on the lung, bronchus, when it goes, the effects of the raised pressure comes innerly, what will happen? The myocardium cannot fully dilate, cannot fully relax. So hence, because it relaxes because of the negative pressures there. So now this negative pressure is a positive pressure. So the ventricle cannot relax, and so there is an impaired filling. Because once it cannot relax, the diastolic filling will not be. So a pleural pericardial effusion causing an impaired diastolic filling because of the large amount is a condition cardiac tamponade. Well, the conditions potentially can cause pericardiac tamponade is pericarditis, tuberculosis, neoplasias. It could be because related to procedures, which could be cardiac procedures in particular, or a trauma. Suddenly there is a trauma, a parent-entering injury, and the blood comes in to the pericardium. The sudden causes diastolic impairment of the heart. Uncommonly, it has been seen with SLE or a uremia, which is recurrent problem, can cause the same. Post-myocardial infarction as a result of Dressler's can cause it. Radiation and myxedema are less common. So for cardiac tamponade to be these causes, that is tuberculosis, pericarditis, reason, the etiology, which remains most commonly idiopathic, but common still is not the idiopathic, because idiopathic pericarditis generally would not result into pericardial effusion, and forget about cardiac tamponade. So after looking into these causes, what is the basic impulse? The pathophysiology is that the accumulation of the fluid in the pericardial space is so significant now that it stops, it is a serious obstruction to the inflow of the blood. That is the left ventricle which receives, or the right ventricle which receives, is now receiving the blood, but with some resistance offered, not internally, externally. And so there is a reduced diastolic compliance. And this causes, once there is less filling, we all know the cardiac output will reduce, and when the cardiac output will reduce, it will result into hypotension. So a fluid around the heart in the pericardium has reduced the filling of the left and the right ventricle. They are affecting the diastole. Because the diastole is affected, so the outputs are reduced and hypotension may result. So the cardiac tamponade features are dyspnea, which was there in pericardial effusion, tachycardia, because the volume has reduced, so the heart rate has to improve to meet across. Hypotension. Now, because the pressures are inside high, it will be reflected onto the jugular venous pressure. So you have a gross elevation of the ventricle, and the heart sounds like in pericardial effusion, they remain soft or muffled. And now what appears is the third heart sound. Why third heart sound? It is the sound of filling, diastolic filling of the myocardium. The diastole, the sound, the heart sound which comes because of diastolic filling, we know is third heart sound. So here diastolic filling is difficult, so third heart sound is now discernible. So we have muffled heart sounds with third heart sound, a jugular venous pressure high, tachycardia, hypotension in a background of dyspnea. It should be looked for cardiac tamponade. But two signs which definitely indicate a grave situation. One is pulses, paradoxes. We know that also that with the there's some disturbance in the background. Please put off your mics. Please put off your mics. There's disturbance, please. The pulses paradoxus is a large fall in blood pressure during inspiration. Generally, what happens is that when in the inspiration, the blood comes into the thoracic cavity. So more blood is inside. So there is some change in the perceptibility of the pulse. But if it is a large change, because the forward flow has been less, so there is a large fall. This is known as pulses paradoxus. The other sign is known as Kussmaul sign. We know that whenever we take a deep inspiration, there is a negative suction and the jugular venous pressure should reduce with inspiration. But it increases with inspiration, a condition which we talked about when we talked about restrictive cardiomyopathy. So patients, if they have Kussmaul sign, that is failure to drop in the JVP column on inspiration, or difficulty of perceptible pulse on deep inspiration, that is pulses paradoxus, it indicates a severe disease when it is in the background of tachycardia, hypotension, and muffled heart sounds as such. So we have a Beck's triad for cardiac tamponade, that is hypotension, elevated JVP, and muffled heart sounds should suggest. But here muffled heart sound should be with a third heart sound in addition. Otherwise, this would also be with the pericardial effusion minus hypotension. Now, since pericardial effusion and cardiac tamponade, so I thought that investigations should be commonly discussed. Investigation for pericardial infusion and pericardial cardiac tamponade are routine blood counts to look for any infections which could be the cause of pericardial effusion, leukocytosis, neutrophilia, or that it could be that because of the infection, the ESR may be high, especially with tuberculosis, which is one of the common causes of pericardial effusion at cardiac tamponade. Electrocardiograph, unlike pericarditis, is not very informative. It can be normal. There could be non-specific STT wave changes, or what will happen? There is a phenomenon called electrical alternance. If you see this graph, you can find that these R complexes are smaller than these complexes, then again so there is an alternating electrical activity. Once it is small, it is less. When it is high, this is because it all depends how much the heart filled in the diastole. The better the heart filled, the better would be the output. So the output varies in each phase of diastole because of the positive pressure offered by the intrapericardial space, which is now filled with this space. So electrical alterance is a sign of cardiac tamponade or large pericardial effusion. Unlike pericarditis, chest X-ray is very helpful. In pericardial effusion, the cardiac silhouette will increase in size if the fluid is more than 250 ml. We said anything which is beyond 50 ml is said to be pathological for pericarditis and should be termed pericardial effusion. Now, if it is more than 250, the cardiac silhouette will increase in size. And this cardiac silhouette only increases with a clear lungs is a very classical sign of large pericardial effusion, which is known as money bag appearance. Look at this X-ray. There is no lung parenchymal shadows. All shadows are clear. And what we have a big heart, which is cardiomegaly, and it is almost like the old bags the old ladies used to keep money into. So it is known as money bag appearance because it is something which doesn't appear so solid, compressible, but definitely the evidence is that there is large. So large pericardial effusion is also known as money bag appearance on the heart, but this appearance of enlargement of the heart will only occur when the fluid is more than 250. More the fluid, larger the size. Echo is the most useful diagnostic tool for pericardial effusion. In pericarditis, it was of not much use except using fluid. Now, how it is helpful? It helps in estimating the size. As I said, it could be mild, moderate, severe. It could help us in locating, is it loculated or circumferized? Most important is the cardiac tamponade effect. That is, the impact it is causing to the diastolic filling. So if it is impacting the diastolic filling, the patient is going into cardiac tamponade because of pericardial effusion. And yes, the fluids need to be aspirated to know whether they are transudate, exudate. So it helps in guiding pericardiocentesis. So on echo, what does it pericardial effusion look like, or the cardiac tamponade look like? Separation of the two pericardial layers, that is, there is an echo-free space. Echo-free space is that both layers appear to be separated from each other. Normally, they are in alignment with each other, so there is no negative space. Two, generally the fluid fills from the posterior and comes to the anterior, because by gravity, when the lies, it is more towards the back side. So posteriorly the small effusion would be there, and as the effusion gets larger, it tends to come anteriorly. So once the fluid becomes circumferentially, you will find both in the anterior and the posterior aspect of the heart that you will find. If it is the initial one, the smaller ones would be more evident on the posterior aspect, and one should look for impaired diastolic filling. Now, if this echo-free space is less than 10 in diastole, it is known as small effusion. So in small effusion, where will you find? More posteriorly. If the echo space is more than 10, it is known as moderate effusion. Maybe it is now coming towards the anterior aspect. And if it is a large one, the echo-free space, I'll just show you in the next slide. If it is more than 20 millimeters, definitely it is a large effusion. And very large, which is compressing the heart, is your cardiac tamponade. So echo tells us the amount, and because of the amount and its diastolic impact on the filling, telling us the amount and impact, which is of the reason that it needs attention. Uh, what happens more? You can understand that all around, if there is fluid and the heart is constricting and contracting and dilate and relaxing, what it will be something like a swinging effect, something like a jhula effect, which is there in between. It is floating in the fluid, which is all around, something like this. If you see this all echo space and imagine this heart, which is the central part of it. Now if it is moving, contracting, this will give you a swinging effect, because there is all fluid around, and the structure which is moving is only this. So a swinging heart may be an impact which one may be visible on the echo. Are there other investigations? Yes, it could be a CAT scan or a magnetic resonance imaging. They generally should only be done whenever there are poor windows made. Poor windows, I mean, is echo may not be very good investigation when the patient has got inflated lungs. The shadows may not, the photos and pictures may not be good. In those settings, one may ask for it. Now, what caused it? The diagnosis would come only by pericardial biopsy. Very rarely affected done. As I talked in the classes on uh, restrictive cardiomyopathy, that is, pericardial biopsy is a choice, but ideally it should be done, but generally not done. So what is the treatment? The treatment is treat the etiology. Is it tuberculosis? Is it secondary to a malignancy? And manage the effusion. How do we manage the effusion? It is a medical emergency. So what we do is we have to drain the fluid. What is causing the diastolic dysfunction? It is the excess fluid. So drain it, and the draining is known as pericardiocentesis. How does the effusions generally tubercular? It all depends on etiological factors. Tuberculous pericardial effusion very often results into chronic constrictive pericarditis. In the next 10 slides, I'll be showing you that what it happens in chronic constrictive pericarditis. Pericardial effusion due to uremias or neoplasias generally do not have a good outcome. Purulent pericardial effusion because of bacterial lesions, if not treated vigorously, are fatal. So it may go to the next stage of healing, as in the case of tuberculosis, or it may be associated with increased mortality because of uremia, neoplasia, or purulency. So it all depends on the etiology, but we need to drain the fluid, reduce the diastolic dysfunction. In the last part, we had a pericarditis which produced fluid, which was pericardial effusion. This pericardial effusion was with or without cardiac tamponade. And now if the pericardium is less effusive, more adhesive, This condition is known as chronic constrictive pericarditis. What it is? A dense, rigid thickening of one or both layers of the pericardium. Book up when it will happen? Whenever there is more fibrosization of the pericardial layers. Generally, itis, fluid, that is effusion. But later on, the fibrosis takes over. So once it is the later effect, that is why I said in the pericardial effusion that tuberculosis later on can develop chronic constrictive pericarditis. So dense, rigid thickening of both the layers or one layer results into thickening of the pericardium, a condition known as chronic constrictive pericarditis, which results into adhesions. And because unlike the pericardial where the heart mobility was not restricted, here there is a sheath encasing the myocardium. So the adhesions now start compressing the heart, and when it compresses the heart, what will happen? Like the extreme form of pericardial effusion, there is impairment of diastolic filling. Conditions to be remembered with constrictive are tuberculosis. It could be later on idiopathic or viral if it becomes recurrent. Irradiation is known to cause encasation because of more fibrosization. Collagen disorders, malignancies have a tendency for thickening of it, and whenever there is a procedure post-cardiotomy, that one may have this as a problem. So patients, because it can be because of the chronicity, recurrence, the potential impact of the rays, which can result into thickening, and the thickening is known as constrictive pericarditis. What is the pathophysiology? There is an impaired diastolic filling due to a rigid pericardium, understandably. I should not elaborate on that. And because of that, the diastole time, the maximum filling time of diastole is just shortened. That is first 1/3, because as it starts enlarging in size, left ventricle enlarging in size with the receipt of blood, the outer layer which is encasing it tends to offer resistance. So diastole filling is improper. Now, when the filling is improper, as we talked in the restrictive cardiomyopathy, amongst the two ventricles, right and the left, which is more affected? The right ventricle, because it still has a lesser pressure effect than the left ventricle. So the right ventricle tends to suffer more. So you have more of the right-sided features like ascites, pedal edema. But if clinically to be examined, well, the diastolic filling was improper, so there would be a low volume pulse, which can at times be associated with atrial fibrillation, which can appear irregular if the associated myocardial disease is there. When we examine for JVP, the neck veins are engorged because diastolic filling is offered resistance. It may have a deep wide descent. In your classes, practical bedside classes, one would be teaching you X descent, Y descent. So because there is a deep wide descent, it is known as Friedrich's sign. The JVP is raised and fails to decrease with deep inspiration, like I talked in the tamponade, that is Kussmaul. So Kussmaul is what? Failure of the JVP to decrease, because with inspiration we had expected more volume to go inside the intrathoracic, but because there is resistance, so the JVP remains the same. So there is failure to fall with deep inspiration. The pericardium, when you examine the pericardium, well, like the pericardial effusion, the heart appears quiet because the apex beat would not be well discernible because there is an outcase sheath. At times, unlike effusions, there might be rather retraction of the pericardium, but not a very common finding. More is a quiet heart, a small sign, deep wide descent, and engorged veins with right ventricular failures. On further examination of the heart, if we palpate, there is something of diastolic shock or tap that one can palpate. Rub could be palpated, a shock could be palpated, but what is more common and more easier is auscultation. And in the auscultation, one auscultates is the pericardial knock. What is pericardial knock? The blood is coming into the ventricle in the early diastolic. So it is something like a plastic balti, that it is offering you resistance, and so as you have that sound, that knock in the balti or in the bucket, the pericardial knock is the same type of sound of a plastic-like ventricle, because it is encased all around by a plastic-like material, and so this sound is known as pericardial knock. The heart sounds may appear normal because there is no in-between fluid now, so one can auscultate them and there would be no murmurs. Abdomen and the other side, it's a predominantly a right-sided ventricle dominant over left ventricle, so you have enlarged, smooth, tender liver. Ascites may be present as such. So we have what is a pericardial knock, a quiet heart, raised JVP, and evidences of right ventricular failure more than the left ventricle. ECG is not informative. Low voltage, as was expected, as I showed you those alternates. Here the heart is less moving, the electrical activity is less because the contractility is also less. So you have poor low voltage QRS complexes, non-specific T wave inversions, and at times atrial fibrillation may be there if the myocardium is involved. X-ray is good here. As it showed you money bag, the heart size, unlike money bag, is now normal or small because it has been encased. And what is encased? Whenever there is fibrosis, there is always a tendency of calcification. So in the lateral view, if the calcification is seen in the entire pericardium, which could be anteriorly, inferiorly, posteriorly, something like, because it will not be a regular, it is something like you break an egg, boiled egg. So there would be eggshell pericardial calcifications, and more importantly, the lungs are clear. So this X-ray would definitely lateral view shows you those. It is just like the outer shell of the egg being broken and the yolk being inside. So you can find that the layer is calcified, and calcification is a feature of constrictive pericarditis. Echo is of great help. The most useful diagnostic for constrictive because it helps you telling how much is the thickening, how much is the calcification, and because of the increased pericardial thickness, at times can be missed. Transthoracic, transesophageal is the echocardiographic is the investigation of choice, but not widely available. Even transthoracic echocardiogram can tell us the thickening. Thickening indicates the extent of disease. Calcification further tells you the chronicity of the disease. Echo was telling us the encasement. Its effects can only be known by the Doppler echo, and Doppler echo will definitely show you restricted filling because there is a rapid deacceleration of the early diastolic mitral flow velocity as it is a plastic-like material. While doing echo, one can find systemic venous congestions, hepatic veins, inspiratory collapse. That is all features of the right ventricular failure and right ventricular heart failure, that is veins, inferior vena cava, liver, and both. If there is some inter-observer difference, CT MRI is very good because CT MRI can again tell us the pericardial thickness. It shows on appearance as a conical narrowed ventricle because the atria have to work more against the stiff diastole. So atria appear to be dilated. There are enlargement of the inferior vena cava because of the right ventricular failure. There is liver which is enlarged. So CT tells you information addedly of the enlarged atria, which obviously our echo and Doppler would be telling us. So echo, Doppler, and whenever not possible, go for CT MRI. So the diagnosis of constrictive pericarditis is pulses, paradoxus, neck vein signs, ascites, and the sound of importance is pericardial knock. Pericardial rub, pericarditis. No sounds, muffled sounds with third heart sound, pericardial effusion, and pericardial knock, the sound because of constrictive. Well, the overall prognosis is poor. Long-standing constrictive pericarditis can result into protein losing enteropathy, and because the myocardial cannot contract to its ability, gradually myocardial failure occurs, and drugs will not help because gradually the myocardium is failing. So what is the treatment? The treatment of medical management is just to relieve of the fluid overload on the right side. There could be the treatment of choice is surgical pericardectomy, that is you strip off this thickened because it is of no use to the heart now. It is impeding the heart functions, and with the stripping off of the pericardial layer, what is more important is treat the cause, tuberculosis being one of the most common. If the cause is thought to be tuberculosis, anti-tubercular drug should be given. Results of surgery are too gratifying in case done timely. So that was constrictive pericarditis. With this, three diseases, pericarditis, pericardial effusion with or without cardiac tamponade, and constrictive pericarditis, is the the diseases of pericardium that needed discussion. Thank you.